The diner was an old wound on the flank of a forgotten highway, a place where time had pooled and grown stagnant. Its name, the Crossroads Grill, was a cruel joke. There were no crossroads here, only the long, lonely asphalt ribbon of County Road 7 that stretched from nowhere to nothing. Rain, a persistent, miserable drizzle that had been falling for 3 days, slicked the tarmac and beaded on the diner's panoramic windows, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of gray and dying green. Inside, the air was thick with the ghosts of a million fried breakfasts, the holy trinity of stale coffee, sizzling bacon grease, and the faint, sweet rot of mop water that never quite dried. The fluorescent lights hummed a weary electric dirge, casting a jaundiced glow on the cracked red vinyl of the booths and the chrome trim of the counter stools. Which had been polished so many times, the metal was soft and dull, like old pewter. It was a purgatory of formica and regret, a place people ended up, not a place they chose. Behind the counter, a woman moved with an economy of motion that was almost unnerving. Her name was Evelyn, and that was all anyone knew. She was a fixture, as much a part of the diner as the humming freezers and the perpetually sticky salt shakers. She was not young, but not old. Her face was a map of places you had not been and things you had not seen, but it was drawn in invisible ink. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, but they did not suggest laughter. Her hair, a nondescript brown, was pulled back in a severe, functional bun. Her uniform, a pale blue polyester dress that had been washed into submission, fit her poorly, hanging from a frame that was lean and wiry, all quiet strength and coiled potential. She worked her station with a placid, almost meditative focus. She refilled coffee cups without being asked, her approach so silent that patrons would startle when the dark, steaming liquid suddenly rose in their mugs. Her hands, when they cleared plates or wiped down the counter, were steady and sure. Never fumbling, never making a wasted gesture. She was a study in stillness, a calm, empty space in the center of the diner's low-grade chaos. Her silence was her defining characteristic. She did not engage in the easy, greasy spoon banter that was the currency of such places. She responded to orders with a slight nod. Questions were answered with the fewest possible words. Her expression was a permanent state of neutral, a placid mask that revealed nothing and invited no inquiry. To the regulars, she was just Eve, the quiet waitress. They saw a woman worn down by life, a person who had accepted her small lot in a forgotten corner of the world. They saw a ghost in a blue uniform, and because she was unremarkable, they barely saw her at all. They did not see the way her eyes, a pale, washed-out gray, missed nothing. They did not see how she clocked the exits every time she entered a room, how she assessed the structural integrity of the ceiling when the wind howled, how her gaze would occasionally linger on a patron's hands, subconsciously evaluating them as a threat or a tool. They saw a waitress. They did not see a weapon in repose. Into this dreary tableau of rain and resignation strode Sheriff Dale Barrows. He was a man carved from a block of cheap authority. He filled the doorway for a moment, his bulk clad in the khaki and brown of the county sheriff's department, his gut straining valiantly against the silver buckle of his belt. His face was florid, a testament to cheap whiskey and chronic indignation, and his mustache, a bristly, aggressive thing, seemed to twitch with a life of its own. He carried the damp, earthy smell of the storm in with him, along with an aura of unearned confidence that radiated like heat from a furnace. He was not the law. He was the local king, and this diner was one of the many provincial courts where he held sway. The few patrons hunched over their meals, a pair of truckers, an old farmer, a young couple trying to outrun a fight, straightened up a little. Heads nodded in his direction. He was a presence, and he demanded acknowledgement. Barrows stomped his boots on the worn linoleum, dislodging clumps of mud and leaving a trail of wet footprints in his wake. He did not take a booth. He claimed the center stool at the counter, the throne. He slapped his damp leather gloves down, the sound cracking like a whip in the quiet room. Evelyn, who had been meticulously refilling the sugar dispensers, turned to face him. Her expression did not change. It was the same flat, neutral mask she wore for everyone. "Coffee, black, and don't burn it this time," he grunted, not as a request, but as a decree. He did not look at her, instead surveying his reflection in the tarnished mirror behind the counter, adjusting the hang of his uniform, puffing out his chest. Evelyn said nothing. She turned, took a clean, heavy ceramic mug from the rack, and moved to the coffee machine. She filled it with a steady hand, the dark liquid gurgling into the cup. She placed it before him on a small paper napkin. The gesture was precise, clinical. She did not flinch. She did not hurry. Barrows took a sip, then slammed the mug back down on the counter. Coffee sloshed over the rim, pooling on the formica. "Damn it, woman! Did you hear me? I said don't burn it. This tastes like tar." His voice was a low growl, designed to carry, to make the other patrons witnesses to his power and her incompetence. Evelyn's eyes flicked from the spilled coffee to his face. For a fraction of a second, her gaze held his. It was like looking into the flat, cold gray of a winter sea. There was no fear in them, no anger. There was nothing. It was this nothingness, this absolute lack of the reaction he expected, deference, apology, a flicker of fear, that always stoked the fire in his belly. He saw it as disrespect, as a silent challenge to his authority. He could not dominate a vacuum, and she was a vacuum of emotion. It was a fresh pot, she stated. It was not an excuse or a defense. It was a simple, unadorned fact, delivered in a monotone voice that was as gray as her eyes. The quiet declaration was, to Barrows, an act of open rebellion. His face darkened, the florid red deepening to a bruised purple. "Are you calling me a liar?" he snarled, leaning forward over the counter, his bulk invading her space. The smell of stale cigars and wet wool washed over her. "I'm the sheriff of this county. I know what burnt coffee tastes like, and I know an insubordinate woman when I see one." He was performing now, playing to the gallery of truckers and farmers. He was demonstrating the natural order of things in his small kingdom. He was the lion, and she was the mouse that had forgotten to scurry. The other patrons shifted uncomfortably in their booths, their eyes darting from the sheriff to the waitress, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They knew this ritual. They had seen Barrows exercise his petty tyranny before on others. No one ever intervened. You did not cross the sheriff. Evelyn did not lean back. She held her ground, a slender, unmoving pillar in the face of his blustering storm. She picked up a damp cloth from beside the sink and, with a slow, deliberate motion, began to wipe up the spilled coffee. Her movements were calm, methodical. She was not cleaning a mess. She was resetting a tactical environment to its baseline state. It was an act of such profound dismissal, of such complete refusal to engage on his terms, that it drove him into a deeper rage. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he roared. His hand shot out, not to strike her, but to grab her. He was not aiming for her arm, but for the front of her uniform, a classic controlling gesture, a prelude to a shake, a way of physically asserting dominance. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The moment his fingers brushed the polyester of her dress, something changed. It was not a big change. To the onlookers, it would have been almost invisible. But in the space between heartbeats, the placid waitress vanished. Her body did not tense. Rather, it settled. It was the unnerving stillness of a predator that has just acquired its target. Her center of gravity seemed to drop, her weight shifting invisibly onto the balls of her feet. Her eyes, which had been flat and empty, suddenly gained a terrifying depth and focus. They were no longer the eyes of a tired waitress. They were optical targeting systems, assessing angles, pressures, and vulnerabilities. His fingers closed on the fabric. Before he could clench his fist, her left hand came up. It did not slap his hand away. It moved with a liquid, impossible speed and cradled his wrist, her fingers finding the precise gaps between the metacarpal bones. Her thumb pressed down on the radial nerve with a casual, clinical pressure. It was not a strike. It was a statement. A jolt of pure, white-hot agony shot up Barrow's arm, a lightning strike of neurological fire that made his vision swim and his breath catch in his throat. His fingers, which had been about to tighten into a fist, went numb and limp. His entire arm spasmed involuntarily. He tried to pull back, but her grip was like a forged steel clamp. He was a bull, a 250-pound man of muscle and fury, and he was utterly, completely immobilized by the slight, 5'6" woman in the pale blue dress. "You should not have done that," she said. Her voice was different. The flat monotone was gone, replaced by a low, quiet resonance that vibrated with absolute authority. It was a voice that did not need to be raised to be obeyed. It was a voice accustomed to giving commands that resulted in immediate, unquestioning compliance, often in situations where the alternative was death. Barrows stared at her, his face a mask of shocked disbelief and excruciating pain. He saw her now. For the first time, he was truly seeing the woman in front of him. He saw the cold, lethal certainty in her eyes. He saw the utter absence of emotion. He was not dealing with a waitress. He was dealing with something else entirely, something he had no frame of reference for, something ancient and dangerous. He felt a primal fear, the terror of an animal that has mistakenly challenged a creature much higher up the food chain. She held his wrist for another 2 seconds, the pressure unwavering, her eyes locked on his. She was downloading data, analyzing his response, his pain threshold, his will to fight. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. She released him. Barrows stumbled back, clutching his arm, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He stared at his hand as if it belonged to someone else, flexing his numb fingers, his face pale with shock. The diner had fallen into a tomb-like silence. The humming of the lights seemed to roar in the sudden quiet. Every eye was fixed on the scene at the counter. The truckers had stopped eating. The old farmer's mouth hung open. They had just witnessed a fundamental law of their universe being casually, effortlessly broken. It was in that moment of stunned silence that the world outside decided to end. The wind, which had been a persistent moan, rose to a visceral, shrieking roar, the sound of a giant tearing sheet metal. The rain, no longer a drizzle, became a horizontal torrent, hammering against the plate glass windows with the force of a fire hose. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the diner into a disorienting, murky twilight. The only illumination came from the weak, gray light filtering through the storm-battered windows. A collective gasp went through the room. Then came the sound. It was a deep, grinding, percussive crunch of metal on metal, a horrific symphony of destruction that was felt as much as heard, a vibration that traveled through the soles of their feet and up their spines. It was followed by the sharp, explosive pop of shattering glass and a final, sickening thud that shook the entire building. Everyone, except Evelyn, scrambled to the windows. Sheriff Barrows, his personal humiliation momentarily forgotten in the face of a larger crisis, was the first one there. He wiped a patch of condensation from the glass and peered out into the maelstrom. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. On the highway, not 50 yards from the diner, was a scene of utter carnage. A tanker truck, the kind that carried gasoline or chemicals, had jackknifed across the slick asphalt, its long silver body twisted at an unnatural angle. A sedan was crumpled against its side like a discarded beer can, and behind it, a multi-passenger van had plowed into the wreckage, its front end obliterated. Smoke, thick and black, was already beginning to billow from the sedan, mixing with the driving rain. A river of dark fluid, gasoline, diesel, something flammable, was spreading from the ruptured tanker, forming a shimmering, iridescent sheen on the flooded roadway. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through the diner. The young woman from the booth began to cry. The farmer muttered a prayer. The truckers were already on their feet, shouting at each other, a cacophony of fear and confusion. "Call 911, someone yelled. "The power's out! Cell service is down out here!" Another voice shot back. Sheriff Barrows sprang into what he thought was action. He was the authority figure. This was his moment. He puffed out his chest, and his voice boomed, trying to project a control he did not feel. "Everybody stay calm! I'm in charge here!" He fumbled for the radio on his belt, his hands still trembling slightly from his encounter with Evelyn. He keyed the mic. "Dispatch, this is Barrows. I've got a multi-vehicle pileup with a tanker on County Road 7, just south of mile marker 42. Need fire, rescue, and medevac now." Static hissed back at him. The storm was too strong. The signal was gone. The realization of their isolation hit the room like a physical blow. They were alone. Barrows, his face now a mask of frantic incompetence, began shouting orders that were useless. "You two," he pointed at the truckers, "get out there and see if you can help. In this storm, with that tanker leaking, that's a bomb waiting to go off, Sheriff." One of them shot back, his face pale. "Don't you argue with me, that's an order!" Barrows bellowed, his authority crumbling into pure noise. He was reacting, not thinking. He was a man of procedure, of calling for backup, of waiting for the professionals. He had no idea what to do when the procedures failed, and he was the only one left. He was a king without a kingdom, a sheriff without a dispatch, and he was failing. Publicly. While the men shouted and the woman sobbed, Evelyn moved. The shift was absolute. The quiet, unassuming waitress was gone, stripped away like a disguise. In her place stood the operator. She did not run. She did not shout. She moved with a liquid grace, a terrifying purposefulness. Her first stop was the diner's kitchen. She ignored the swinging doors, instead placing a hand on the top and vaulting over the counter in a single, fluid motion that was so unexpected and athletic it silenced the room. A moment later, she emerged, not with a weapon, but with tools. In one hand, she carried the diner's heavy-duty first aid kit, the kind mandated by the health department. In the other, she held the kitchen's fire extinguisher. She had also grabbed a handful of clean, dry dish towels. She moved to the front door, her eyes already scanning the wreckage outside, her mind processing the chaos into a clear, cold, tactical problem. She paused at the door and turned. Her eyes swept over the panicked faces in the diner. Then her voice cut through the noise. It was not loud, but it had a quality of command that made Barrow's bellowing sound like the squeaking of a frightened child. "You," she said, her gaze locking onto the first trucker, a big man with a gut and a terrified expression. "Your name?" Frank," he stammered. "Frank. The spill from that tanker is flowing toward the ditch on the east side of the road. I need you and him." She nodded at the second trucker. "To go into the kitchen. Find every bag of flour, salt, sugar, and sand you can. Bring them out here. We need to build a dam at the edge of the parking lot to divert the fuel away from the building." It was not a request. It was an order, precise and logical, and it gave the terrified men a task, a purpose. They stared at her for a second, then nodded and scrambled toward the kitchen, grateful for the direction. Her eyes moved to Barrow's. "Sheriff, your vehicle has a spotlight. Get it positioned to illuminate the scene, and give me your radio." Barrows, stunned into silence by her sudden assumption of command, just stared at her. His mind was struggling to reconcile the woman who had just crippled him with a touch, and the waitress who served him burnt coffee. "Your radio, Sheriff." "Now," she repeated, her voice dropping a half octave, laced with an impatience that promised consequences. "Your low-band frequency might not reach dispatch, but it might reach a relay tower or another unit in the area. It's better than nothing." He fumbled at his belt and handed her the radio without a word. The transfer of the object was a transfer of power, a public abdication of his authority. Everyone saw it. He saw it. She took the radio, her fingers moving over the controls with an expert familiarity. She clipped it to the waistband of her own uniform. Then, she turned to the young couple in the booth. "You two, stay away from the windows. If that tanker goes, this glass becomes shrapnel. Get under the table, now." They dove for cover without a second thought. With the interior of the diner organized and delegated, she turned her attention to the real problem. She took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring. She was about to step out into the storm, into a volatile zone of twisted metal, injured people, and spilled fuel. She looked out at the rain and the wind, her face utterly calm, her expression that of a master craftsman surveying her workbench. It was not a look of fear. It was a look of focus. It was the look of a woman going to work. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the howling chaos. The wind hit her like a physical blow, whipping her thin dress around her legs and tearing at her hair, pulling strands loose from their severe bun. The rain was cold and hard, plastering the fabric to her skin. She did not even seem to notice. Her movements were economical, designed to conserve energy and maintain balance in the gale. She moved low to the ground, her steps sure on the slick, treacherous asphalt. Her first priority was assessment, triage. She moved not toward the loudest sounds or the most obvious damage, but with a methodical path that allowed her to see everything. Her eyes scanned the tanker first. She noted the location of the rupture, the flow rate of the spill, the type of placard on the side indicating its contents. Flammable liquid. Class 3. Bad. Very bad. She noted the wind direction. It was blowing the fumes away from the diner, but toward the crumpled sedan. She reached the sedan first. The smoke was thicker now, acrid and black. It was an electrical fire, not yet a fuel fire. The driver, a man in a business suit, was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. The driver's side door was crushed, jammed shut. She didn't waste a second trying it. She moved to the passenger side, found it also jammed, Without hesitation, she used the nozzle of the fire extinguisher she carried to smash the passenger side window. The glass imploded in a shower of tiny cubes. She reached inside, unlocked the door, and pulled it open. The interior was a mess of deployed airbags and the smell of burnt wiring. She leaned in, her movements swift and sure. Her fingers went straight to the man's carotid artery. A pulse, thready, but there. She performed a quick check for major bleeding, her hands moving with practiced skill over his body. She noted his breathing, shallow. She checked his pupils, uneven, head injury. He needed to be moved, but moving him risked a spinal injury. Leaving him risked him burning alive. It was a cold calculation of risk. The fire was the more immediate threat. She unbuckled his seatbelt. Then, with a strength that seemed impossible for her slender frame, she hooked her arms under his and began to drag him from the vehicle. She did not just pull. She used her body as a lever, positioning her feet to use the car's frame for leverage, a technique of body mechanics that multiplied her strength. She hauled the unconscious man, who outweighed her by a good 70 pounds, out of the car and dragged him clear of the wreckage, moving him 20 yards away toward the relative safety of the diner's parking lot. She left him on the asphalt and immediately turned back to the wreck. There was no time to waste. Next was the van. It was a family vehicle, a minivan, its front end compressed into a mangled accordion of metal and plastic. Through the shattered windshield, she could see a man and a woman in the front seats, both conscious but pinned. In the back, she could hear a child crying, a thin, terrified wail that cut through the roar of the storm. This was the most complex problem: extrication. She didn't have the tools, the jaws of life, the heavy rescue equipment. She had her hands, her mind, and a fire extinguisher. She circled the van, her eyes probing for weaknesses, for points of entry. The side door was bent, but it might move. She wedged the base of the fire extinguisher into the gap and threw her entire body weight against it, using it as a makeshift pry bar. The metal groaned in protest. Once. Twice. On the third try, the lock gave way with a screech of tortured steel and the door slid open a few feet. It was enough. She slipped inside. "My name is Evelyn," she said, her voice impossibly calm in the confined, terrifying space. "I'm here to help you. What is your name?" The woman in the passenger seat, her face bleeding from a cut on her forehead, sobbed, "Sarah, my husband, his legs, and my little boy, Tommy." "All right, Sarah, we're going to get you all out." "Tommy," she called to the back, her voice gentle but firm. "Tommy, can you hear me?" A small, scared voice piped up. "Yes." "Tommy, are you hurt?" "My arm is sticky," he whimpered. Sticky meant blood. Evelyn filed the information away. The parents first. The child was conscious and talking, a good sign. The parents were pinned, a more immediate danger if the fire from the sedan spread. She assessed the husband's legs, pinned by the dashboard, which had been forced back in the collision. She couldn't move him. She turned to Sarah. Her door was crushed, but her legs were free. "Sarah, I'm going to get you out first," Evelyn said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We're going to move you through this side door." She quickly and expertly guided the terrified woman, showing her how to move, how to avoid putting pressure on potentially injured limbs, talking her through it with a steady, reassuring cadence. While this masterclass in crisis management was unfolding outside, a different scene was playing out back in the diner. The two truckers, Frank and his friend, had returned from the kitchen, their arms laden with heavy paper bags of flour and salt. They dumped them near the entrance, then stared out the window, their faces slack with awe. They were watching Evelyn work. Sheriff Barrows was there too, standing uselessly beside them, the spotlight from his cruiser now cutting a swath of white through the gray storm, illuminating her every move. He was watching a ghost operate in a hurricane. He saw her smash the car window. He saw her pull the unconscious man free with impossible strength. He saw her pry open the van door. He was witnessing a level of competence, of sheer, unadulterated capability that he could not even begin to comprehend. It was like watching a fish try to understand the concept of flight. "Who the hell is she?" Frank, the trucker, whispered, his voice full of a reverence usually reserved for gods or monsters. Barrows didn't answer. He couldn't. His entire worldview, his understanding of the hierarchy of his own small town, had been dismantled in the span of 10 minutes. The quiet, insubordinate waitress he had tried to humiliate was now single-handedly managing a disaster that he, the sheriff, was utterly powerless to effect. The shame was a hot, coiling thing in his gut, more painful than the memory of her grip on his wrist. It was the shame of being proven irrelevant. Just as Evelyn was easing the injured woman out of the van, the distant but unmistakable sound of sirens began to cut through the howl of the wind. A pair of state police cruisers, followed by a heavy rescue fire truck, were navigating the flooded road, their lights painting the storm in strobing flashes of red and blue. Help had arrived. But the real show was about to begin. The first person to emerge from the lead cruiser was not a trooper, but a man in a crisp, dark suit, his gray hair cut in a severe military style. He wore a windbreaker with a single, discreet emblem on the chest, the seal of the State Office of Emergency Management. He was flanked by 2 state troopers who looked like they had been carved from granite. This was Director Evans, a man who had commanded a brigade in Afghanistan before taking on the job of managing his state's worst disasters. His face as he took in the scene, the jackknifed tanker, the multi-car pileup, the spreading fuel, was a grim, professional mask. His eyes immediately found the lone figure working at the van. He saw her methodical movements, her calm posture amidst the chaos. He saw something familiar in her efficiency, in the way she commanded her small space of the disaster. He started walking toward her, his pace quick and purposeful. Evelyn had just finished a preliminary check on the little boy Tommy in the back of the van. His arm was broken, a simple fracture, but he was otherwise unharmed. She was calming him down when she heard the crunch of boots on the wet gravel behind her. She turned. Director Evans stopped about 10 feet away from her. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, widened almost imperceptibly. His professional mask cracked, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock and recognition. He stared at her, at the cheap, rain-soaked polyester uniform, at the strands of hair whipped loose by the wind, and he saw past all of it. He saw something else entirely. "My God," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper against the wind. Then, his back snapped ramrod straight. His feet came together with an audible click of his heels on the asphalt. He raised his right hand in a salute so sharp, so precise, it could have cut glass. It was not the casual salute of a civilian official. It was the deep, instinctual gesture of a soldier recognizing a superior officer of legendary status. "Commander Reed," he said, his voice now ringing with a profound and unwavering respect that carried over the storm. I didn't know you were stateside." Inside the diner, the 3 men watching at the window saw the exchange. They saw the important-looking man in the suit. They saw the crisp, reverent salute. And they saw Evelyn, the waitress, return it with a nod that was both a dismissal and an acknowledgement of a shared world they could not imagine. Sheriff Barrows felt his knees go weak. "Commander," the word echoed in the cavern of his skull. It was a military rank, a senior one. His mind, already reeling, simply broke. The two state troopers with Evans had now recognized her as well, their own expressions shifting to something akin to awe. One of them spoke into his radio, his voice hushed. "Dispatch, be advised. We have a VIP on site, confirmed. It's Seadragon." The name fell into the chaotic scene like a depth charge. Seadragon. It was a call sign, a name spoken only in classified briefings and whispered with reverence in the halls of Special Operations Commands. It was a legend. The ghost of Kandahar, the architect of a dozen impossible missions whose details would never be declassified, a Tier 1 operator who had become a myth long before she had retired. Commander Evelyn Reed, a decorated officer of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, a Navy SEAL, and Dale Barrows had tried to bully her over a cup of burnt coffee. The absurdity, the sheer cosmic scale of his mistake, threatened to swallow him whole. The newly arrived firefighters and paramedics moved in, their professionalism a stark contrast to Barrows's earlier panic. But they all seemed to orbit Evelyn. The fire captain, a grizzled veteran, approached her not as a civilian, but as a fellow professional, asking for her assessment of the scene. She delivered it in a calm, clinical, and precise report, using technical language that was a world away from "take your order." She detailed the nature of the injuries, the structural instability of the vehicles, the composition of the fuel spill, and the probable fire risk. She spoke their language. She spoke it better than they did. Once the scene was fully handed over to the emergency crews, Evelyn walked back toward the diner. Her work was done. She moved through the flashing lights and the organized chaos, an anonymous figure once more in her drab blue dress. But now, everyone saw her differently. The paramedics nodded at her with respect. The troopers parted to let her pass. She had become visible. She entered the diner. The patrons were silent, their eyes wide. They looked at her as if she had just descended from another planet. She ignored them, her gaze sweeping the room and landing on Sheriff Barrows. He was still standing by the window, looking like a man who had just been told the world was flat after he had circumnavigated it. He looked small inside his own uniform. Evelyn walked up to him. She stopped a few feet away. She was no longer a waitress. She was no longer an operator. She was something else now. An instructor. "Sheriff," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a battleship. "We need to have a conversation about your performance today." Barrows flinched as if struck. "Ma'am, Commander, I didn't know," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "That is the entire point," she cut him off, her voice like ice. "You not knowing is the critical failure. You walked into a situation and made an assumption based on a uniform, a gender, and a location. You saw what you wanted to see, a person you could intimidate. You didn't see a citizen. You didn't see a potential asset. You saw a target for your ego. That is not a mistake in customer service, Sheriff. That is a tactical failure of the highest order." She took a step closer. He instinctively took a step back. "Your first error," she continued, her voice dissecting him like a scalpel, "was your situational awareness. You failed to properly assess the individual in front of you. You escalated a non-confrontation into a physical one without considering the potential capabilities of your opposition. In my old line of work, a mistake like that doesn't get you a bruised ego. It gets you a flag-draped coffin." Your second failure was in crisis management. When faced with a dynamic, evolving threat, you defaulted to yelling. You issued unclear, unsafe, and tactically unsound orders. You froze. Your authority, which is derived from that badge, proved to be a hollow shell the moment it was actually tested. A badge doesn't make you a leader. The ability to lead is what gives the badge its meaning. Today, you rendered that piece of tin on your chest meaningless. Barrows could not speak. He could only stand there and take the verbal evisceration. It was more painful, more humiliating than any physical blow could ever be. "I am not going to file a report," Evelyn said, and for a moment, a flicker of hope appeared in Barrows's eyes. It was immediately extinguished. Filing a report would be insufficient. It would be a punishment. "You don't need punishment, Sheriff. You need education." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "The cleanup and investigation here will take days. Director Evans has provisional authority over this site. I have just spoken with him. He has agreed to my recommendation. For the duration of the emergency operations on this scene, you are being reassigned. Your new duty station is here. You will report to me. You will be in charge of logistics. That means you will make the coffee. You will coordinate food for the crews. You will sweep the floors. And you will do it until I am satisfied that you have learned the difference between wearing a uniform and earning the authority that comes with it. Is that understood, Sheriff?" He stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was being ordered by a waitress in a diner to become the diner's busboy as his own punishment. The poetic justice of it was so complete, so utterly devastating, that all he could do was nod his head, a broken man. "I didn't hear you, Sheriff," she said, her voice flat. Yes, ma'am," he choked out. "Understood." The story of what happened at the Crossroads Grill that day passed into local legend. It became a fable told to new deputies at the county academy, a cautionary tale about ego and assumption. They called it the Ballad of Burnt Coffee. And Sheriff Dale Barrows was never the same. He did his penance. For 3 days, he made coffee, he served food, he cleaned the diner, all under the quiet, watchful eye of Commander Evelyn Reed. He learned humility in the most public and painful way imaginable. And strangely, it made him a better man. It made him a better sheriff. He started to listen. He started to see people, not just uniforms and roles. He never raised his voice in anger again. He would sometimes tell the story himself, ending it with the same line. "I thought I was the most important person in the room, but I wasn't even the most dangerous person behind the counter." Evelyn Reed stayed for another month, then disappeared as quietly as she had arrived. Some said she was recalled to service for a special project. Others said she simply moved on, seeking another quiet place to be invisible. No one knew for sure, but she left behind a lesson, burned into the memory of a small county. It was a simple lesson, one that humanity is doomed to learn over and over again. That the most dangerous people are often the ones you see the least. That true strength doesn't need to announce itself. It is quiet, it is patient, it is professional, and it is always, always ready. The real measure of a person is not the noise they make when they enter a room, but the impact they have when chaos erupts. It is substance over style, action over words, and competence over confidence. It is a truth as old as the sea and as unforgiving as a storm.